guys don't know me, my name is Jordan. I'm 20 years old. I'm a freelance videographer and video editor. I'm also Cameron's twin brother. When I knew I wanted to speak, this message immediately came to my mind, this idea of meaningful suffering. Me personally, I feel like during my worst times, that's when I draw the most strength. That's when I run the furthest. That's when I lift the heaviest. It's when I have this external force putting pressure on me to perform, and I feel like I have to suit up and face the challenge. I think part of that is because God has shown me in my own life that sometimes we can't fulfill our full purpose without pain. And so with that, I'll be hopping straight into the book of Job. If you want to follow along, you can. We'll be in chapter 1, verse 6. So the first where it starts is, "One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, 'Where have you come from?' Satan answered the Lord, 'From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it.' Then the Lord said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil.' And then Satan says, 'Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face.'" So what Satan is saying here is he has no other reason but to praise you. You've given him everything. I bet if I gave all of you guys a beach house in Turks and Caicos, you'd have some pretty nice things to say about me, right? So what he's saying is, take everything away from him and he'll curse you. So that's what God allows happen. He says you can take everything away from him, but the man himself, you cannot lay a finger. And so I want you to pay attention to what Job does after he loses everything. So in the next chapter, messenger after messenger comes up to Job, delivering this terrible news. A fire came from the heaven and it struck your servants, all of your flock, your sheep, your camels, your donkeys, they're all dead. You know, your sons and daughters were feasting when this strong gust of wind came and it knocked the whole house down, and all of them are dead, right? And so what we see Job does in this is he gets up, he takes his robe off, he shaves his head, and I think this is biblical confirmation that every guy has to have a buzz cut at least once in their life. Don't quote me on that though. But he gets up, he takes his robe off and shaves his head, and he falls to his knees. And he says, "Naked I came from the womb, and naked I shall depart. The Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." See, in this time, Job has this understanding that the blessings God has given him are just in fact that. They are blessings. They have nothing to do with his relationship with God. They're just a privilege that God has given to him. And so for me personally, I know in my life, like when one bad thing happens, it's so easy to overlook the blessings that have already occurred. And like, of course, as humans, we're going to pray for blessings and not pain, right? But a lot of the time, God's favor is found in pain. God's favor is found in pain. And when we look at our salvation, even that was found in pain, right? Like Jesus dying on the cross, this ultimate example of meaningful suffering. And so we see in John, Peter's trying to defend Jesus when he knows he's about to get crucified. He even cut someone's ear off. And Jesus is like, "What are you doing? Like, if I wanted saving, I would ask my Father. But since I know this plan he has for me, I know that through this ultimate example of meaningful suffering, an everlasting joy will be produced on the other end, and it can't come about any other way." And so James 1:12 says, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love them." And me, I'm a very, very visual learner, so I'll give you an analogy here. So imagine this seed. A seed has to be placed in this hard, dark, firm place in the ground and covered up with dirt in order to grow and sprout. And a lot of the times, that's really how it is for our lives. Like, we have to be put in these hard, dark, painful places and covered up to where we don't think there's a light at the other end of the tunnel. But through that pain, we have to remember that we've been planted, and that if we just water ourselves daily spiritually, we can go from this seed into this plant well above the surface. And a seed must be planted to come into fruition, and the same is for our lives. A seed must be planted to come into fruition, and the same is for our lives. And when I reflect on the things that I'm most proud of or my best accomplishments, a lot of the times it comes from doing something uncomfortable or being put in an uncomfortable position. Even Cameron can attest to that. Like, when I first started doing videography, I started during football season. I didn't want to be anywhere near the field. I'm this big introvert. I'll rather shoot from the crowd than go on the field. But by putting myself in this uncomfortable position, I've been given so many opportunities to pursue what I really want to do. And so I think it's fair to say that easy and fun doesn't always mean fruitful. Easy and fun doesn't always mean fruitful. And I think athletes can really attest to this, like those practices where your coach has you running those suicides that you absolutely hate. But the truth is that's where you gain the most. That's where you have the edge on your opponents, because when you go to overtime, now you have that edge on your cardio because you did something that you didn't want to do. Or in the weight room when you were pushed to do those three to five extra reps when you already thought you reached failure. But that's where your muscle really grows is doing these uncomfortable things. I had this old youth group leader, He used to always close in prayer. He used to always pray, God, help us be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Help us be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because there's this understanding that when we do uncomfortable things, we grow. And so I feel like as a believer that can be a little discouraging. Like easy and fun doesn't always mean fruitful. Like we have to live this hard life, but God doesn't say that it's going to be easy. Actually, he says it's going to be pretty hard. He kind of tells us straight up. And what he does promise, though, is that he'll be with us through all the way. Psalm 32:8 says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. And a lot of the times, and for me personally, God has to take us to those lowest points to get us in order. I know I spend a lot of my life grabbing. Like if I just get her, then I'll be happy. Or if I make this amount of money or get this job or get these people to like me, then maybe I'll be happy. But the truth is, God has to take us to these lowest points to where you're like, God, you're all I have, for him to look right back at you and say, I'm all you've ever needed. You were spending so much time trying to find your purpose and your value in other people that you forgot that I'm the one that planted you in the first place. Because I knew that if you watered yourself with me, you would grow from this seed to this plant. And now you're not just this plant, but now you're bearing fruit and you're causing other people to come into fruition through what you've done. God calls us to be fishers of men. He calls us to be disciples of all nations. And we know that a disciple isn't a perfect person, but it's someone who's constantly growing in their faith and their love for God and for others. And in the Bible it says, if we just had the faith of a mustard seed, we can move mountains. So imagine during these tough times, if you just had faith of half of that or a third of that, what you could do for yourself and what you could do for others around you. Job chapter 2 verse 4 says, skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life, but now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. And during this whole confrontation between Satan and God, like in my head, I'm thinking God's probably like, you think you're doing something by bringing Job to the lowest point of his life, but the only thing you're doing is bringing him closer to me because I am his foundation. So when I look at problems in my life, I'm like, yeah, this sucks right now. Yeah, this is painful, but it's just giving me more of a reason to depend on God. And for me to overlook the blessings when one road bump happens, it's so selfish because this life was never mine to begin with, and I was never supposed to do this life by myself anyway. So that's when I really need to lean on my community, and I need to lean on God. We can see Job has this understanding from the beginning. As soon as he loses everything, he falls to his knees in worship. He has that understanding. And so Satan gives Job all these sores all over his body. And he thinks that Job is going to curse God because of this. And even Job's wife is kind of influencing him to curse God, which is kind of crazy. And then Job has all these friends come over from all over. And they're basically like, what did you do wrong, Job? Because this God that we serve, he's not just going to do that for no reason. And I feel like a big question that can happen in these painful times for believers and non-believers is, if we serve such a good God, why does he allow bad things to happen to good people? And if we look at Job, we know he did nothing wrong. Chapter 1 says he is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And this verse right here really brings a lot of comfort to me. It's Psalms 33, verse 4 through 5. It says, for the word of the Lord is right and true. He is faithful in all he does. The Lord loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of his unfailing love. So now through this, I know that regardless of what I'm going through, I know I serve a just and a righteous God, one whose earth is filled with his unfailing love. So now I know that regardless of what I think of the situation, this is right and this is just because of the God I serve. And so throughout the next few chapters, there's this dialogue between Job and his friends. And they're basically going back and forth. If you read out through the whole thing, they're basically just taking turns trying to figure out what Job did wrong, and they're questioning God. And then in chapter 38 through 41, the Lord finally speaks, and he's angry. He's like, who are you guys to question me? And an example of this is 38, verse 4 through 7. It says, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand who marked off its dimension. Surely you know who stretched a measuring line across it. On what's where its footing sets, or who laid its cornerstone, while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. And he even goes further throughout the chapters, and he says, do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you watch when the doe bears her fawn? Do you know the months till they bear? Do you know the times till they give birth? And he's basically saying, like, you guys are questioning me, but you don't even know the half of it. I'm this God of this whole entire universe, and I know things that you don't even know, so for you to question me, it's crazy. And so after this, the Lord had said these things to Job. He says to Eliphaz the Temanite, I am angry with you and your two friends, because you have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Job has. So now take 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant, and sacrifice a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you, and I'll accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly. After Job prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had. Now, me personally, I feel like I spent a lot of my life doubting God can deliver me from my problems. And we sing this song in church called Mercy by Elevation Worship. And it goes, I'm so glad that my freedom isn't based on what I've done, but on the power and the mercy and the goodness of the blood. And if we see it and we look in time and time again, God has constantly delivered people on a scale way greater than ours. We see it with Daniel. Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, but God didn't allow him to get eaten. Joseph was Potiphar's servant for 13 years and was in prison, but his story didn't end there. Jesus allowed Peter to fall into the water, but he didn't allow him to drown. So for me to think that I can't get delivered from my problems after my God has showed me time and time again, it's very selfish. So after this, we see that through standing firm in God during these trials, Job didn't just get his blessings back, but he got twice as much back. And just like the seed I was talking about earlier, God won't just bring us to the surface to help us grow, but he'll help us grow past that. But he has to plant us first in these rough spots where we have to depend on him. A lot of times he has to plant us first in these hard, uncomfortable spots, and we have to put ourselves in these uncomfortable positions in order to grow. And then there's these two verses right here that really help me when I'm going through times. It's Romans 5:3. We know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. And then John 16:33. I have told you these things so that me you may have peace. In the world you have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And this kind of hits home because it's like Jesus sent his only begotten son to face the same temptations we face. And he had this ultimate sacrifice, this ultimate example of meaningful suffering. And he gives us this freedom that's not based off what we've done, but is a reflection of the God we serve. And so Pastor Mark was talking about 2 weeks ago how we're made in God's image, but we're also made in his spiritual likeness. So I'm not just made in God's image, but I have the ability to love like him and to serve like him. And that's huge because that's honestly really what it takes to get out of these hard spots, because no one knows what that spot is like better than someone who's been in it. So if I can love you and I can serve you, that could bring you to fruition without me even knowing it. And then I'll leave you this right here. When we have doubt and the pain in our lives, we need to have faith in the provider's plan. When you think all is gone and you just, what is this coming to? We need to have faith in the provider's plan. Because at the end of the day, we know we serve a just God, a God who loves justice and righteousness, a God whose earth is filled with his unfailing love. And then I have these 3 questions right here. What are some things during tough times that hold you in that negative space? What are things that we can do to keep fighting on the days where all hope seems lost? And then how can we prepare ourselves for tough times even if we aren't currently in them?